Biodiversity is our life support system, but if we look at the components of that, then we have direct uses of species for hunting, new crops, new genes and drugs. Biodiversity in terms of the diversity of plants and animals and fungi and other species provides information and can be used for bioprospecting, where we actually look for chemicals that provide the basis for new drugs. But also biodiversity has an aesthetic and a non-use value. We just like to interact with diverse environments which are provided by biodiversity. And then finally there's direct uses. We use over 40,000 species, including drugs. So the Pacific Taxol was derived from the Pacific yew, and aspirin was derived from willow. And we also use biodiversity to provide new genes for existing crop plants. So for instance, Zea diploperennis is a native maize, and it's proved to be the source of a range of genes which confer resistance in commercial maize crops. Bioprospecting. So organisms are able to synthesize chemicals that might provide the blueprint for future drugs. Gives a value for protecting areas of high biodiversity such as rainforests, and one example of this is InBio in Costa Rica, where they have developed a contract with a drug company to allow the drug company to prospect for new chemical substances that might form the basis of drugs. And then there's the example of the Brazilian pit viper, which actually provided the chemical for a hypertension drug, which was then developed and led to a market running into billions of dollars. Now, one interesting aspect about bioprospecting is who owns the intellectual property rights. Now, Costa Rica, through InBio, has been quite good at protecting its property rights, where Costa Rica is viewed as owning the species that it hosts in its rainforest. The Brazilian pit viper example was more problematic because the scientists who actually discovered the chemical in pit viper venom that had the blood pressure reducing effect, it didn't get any of the royalties from the drug that was then developed. So this means that developing countries are sometimes a bit reluctant to allow bioprospecting, and possibly don't see it as a potential source of value for their forests, which is unfortunate, because if they got a stream of revenue and royalties for protecting biodiversity, which could be then used for bioprospecting, then that would increase the incentive to protect it. Aesthetic and non-use value. So there's evidence from numerous contingent valuation and choice experiment studies that biodiversity is valued simply for itself. So people like to see birds and animals and plants in the wild. They like to see a wide range of those. They like to experience well-functioning ecosystems. So an example of this was an early contingent valuation study for the Kakadu National Park undertaken by Carson et al., which showed that there was a value of about $100 to $250 per household for actually a relatively small part of Kakadu National Park, and in that case it was protecting it from an extension of a uranium mine. Having said this, sometimes these studies are actually quite difficult to implement because people find it very difficult to value something as complex as biodiversity. You know, so how much do I value the Great Barrier Reef being protected, or how much do I value reducing the area of biodiversity loss in an area of Borneo? I would find those questions quite hard to answer, even though I might have an existence value over those environmental assets. So recap: biodiversity is highly valued. In fact, in total, we depend upon it, so have an extremely high value on it. The marginal value of a species is difficult to estimate, valued as a public good for its existence value. And the review question is, what is bioprospecting?